Right, good to see you back. We are Because We Can, and my name is Chris. Hopefully, you're back here because you saw our first video where we did a quick introduction to the project that we've got on at the moment. If you haven't seen that, take a look. It's about a minute long. Like I say, it just gives you a quick introduction. And in that video, we promised that this time we would get into the workshop, build a chassis jig, and take an angle grinder to subframes, I think was the phrase I used. And we will. But first, I'd like to go over a few guiding principles that we come up with to help keep us on track. We feel that doing a project like this with a lot of challenges, it's very easy to go off at a tangent, and before you know it, the project's too difficult. So we're going to set ourselves a few guiding principles that will hopefully keep us on that track and achieve our goal. Oh, and I should just say, in the background, I've got video playing and some photos of the classic mini body shell arriving and how we cut the roof off to get it down the passageway. One of the reasons why we need to make it 4/5 scale. And at the end there's also the arrival of my English wheel. So, guiding principle number 1. Okay, so this is about look and feel. We all probably know what a classic mini feels like to drive. You know, people refer to it being like a go-kart and it being fun and exciting and horrible at the same time. Probably a few rose-tinted glasses in some of these things, but what we're trying to do is the end product's got to deliver that same feeling. We want it to look like a classic mini, but because it's smaller, the ideal reaction would be for somebody to go, "Whoa, hang on a minute, that's a classic mini, isn't it?" But I don't remember them being that small, and that's what we're after, really. That sort of, you know, where you're not quite sure what you've just seen is what you think it is. I think something that's important to that is that from whatever angle you look at it, proportion should be right. We don't want it to look squashed in any one dimension. We want it to just look perfect. And then when we're finished it and we're driving it, we want it to have the same sort of feel, you know, that sort of, like I said, fun characteristic about it, where it feels like a mini, even though it's smaller. That's going to be a challenge because the wheelbase will be shorter, it'll be a bit more jittery. But, you know, from what I remember of minis, they felt like that anyway. So hopefully we'll get the character spot on as well. Okay, so principle number 2 follows on really from number 1 in that there should be no deviation from principle number 1 unless it's absolutely necessary. Now, one area where I think it will be necessary is the drivetrain, because it's going to have so much less space to fit an engine in. Even a bike engine I'm not sure will fit in. So we're going for a electric powertrain, and just because the space dictates, nothing else will fit really. And that's an ethos we're going to try and do all the way through this build. We're only going to go away from what a Mini did if we absolutely need to. Now the third one is that we want to achieve an OEM look in everything we do. Again, to make people think that it's an original Mini, even if they don't realise it's smaller, then it's important that it has that OEM quality to it, and everything that we do has got to bear that in mind and be to that standard of quality. Fourth principle is all about it being made out of new parts. The final product, when we take it for on the road and it's finished, I want it to have a new registration, so it's going to need all new parts to be a brand new car. Going through the project, we're going to be using second-hand parts a lot to do mock-ups and test builds and trial fits, but when it comes to being on the road, it'll have all brand new parts. And the final one, not least of all, is that it needs to pass an IVA test. I don't know if everyone's familiar, but in Britain we have to pass a special test when we build a new car to be able to get it legally on the road, and that's called an IVA test. So enough of this voiceover, let's do what we promised last video and get in the workshop, build a chassis jig and have a look at taking the angle grinder to some old second-hand subframes. So we're here in the workshop. Where did we start? Well, we started with the chassis jig. Gives us a nice solid plane on which to build the rest of the car. Now I should probably say at this juncture that when I started this build I didn't plan on doing any YouTube content, so I've not got that much in the way of video footage. I've got a lot of photo progress to show you, but no, I didn't intend to do this at the start, so bear with us. I think we've got a lot of very insightful and valuable content to go through, because there's a lot to consider and think about in getting to the stage of building the chassis. So hopefully you'll find that interesting and stay along with us. So the chassis jig, it allows everything to be set up from a nice flat level surface, and so we can reference everything from that. It's fabricated from 2 C-section girders for the sides and some 5mm wall thickness box section for the cross members. It's got casters, so it's manoeuvrable, and each of those are height adjustable, so that we can make sure that the jig stays level whenever we move it. And we also made sure it was square when we welded it up. One of the best things we did was to put a centre line all the way down the length of it, so that we had a reference point that we could build the car from off of each side, and that was very useful. Now in terms of dimensions, we made it long enough to fit the reduced size Mini on, which is just over 2.4 metres, and it's 700mm wide, which allows us to have the wheels on each side overhang, and that gives us the ability to test things such as suspension travel, bump steer, etc. So the side members don't interfere with the wheel travel. Now, once you've got the chassis jig, what comes next? Well, you've got to do an awful lot of dimensions from both the standard Mini and then work out what we're trying to shrink it to. So I'll cover some of those now. If you look on the internet, there's a lot of variation in the dimensions for Minis. I think partly because, you know, over the years they had different wide arches, different spaces, different tyre combinations. So what we basically did was measure our own body shell and go from there. So I'm going to put up a list of the critical dimensions now on screen, and then I'll talk through each one of them and how we derive the dimensions that we need. So you can see there's the dimensions as we measured our body shell, times by the 20% reduction that we're after to give us the dimensions we're aiming at. And there's a couple of issues that cropped up with some of these, so I'll just talk you through each one of those. The next thing to look at is the ride height of a Mini. Took me a while to find anything definitive on this, but I came across MED Engineering and their website, which if you haven't seen, I suggest you have a look. It's got quite a lot of information on there about suspension and steering geometry and setup, which is very good. So they suggested that we measure it from either end of the sill and do it from the road surface to the sill flange. And another search on the internet suggested that these two dimensions should be 254mm at the rear and 241mm at the front. So that's what we went with. But since then I've seen other figures on the internet, so there isn't consistency out there, and I guess it depends on different tyre wheel combinations and other things as the cars have changed over the years. And again, the thing is here that we're reducing it by 20%. So to keep everything in proportion, we wanted to take those figures and, roughly speaking, take about 50mm off each one. And we think we can achieve that by solely through changing the wheel and tyre combination that we're going to use. I'll cover that a little bit later on, but that should give us 50mm or thereabouts. Next up is deciding where the hub face should sit in relation to the centre line. Now we know the only fixed dimension we have at the moment is the overall width of the car of 1100mm. So the centre line to the outside of the body shell is 550. So the diagram I'm putting up now explains how we work back from that very outer edge to where the hub face is, and that allowed us to then position the subframes on the lateral axis of the chassis jig. The next complication to work through is the track width. A standard Mini has a different track width front to rear, anywhere between 24mm less at the rear, upwards depending on which statistics you take. So we took that 24mm and applied our 20% reduction to get 19mm narrower track width at the rear. We also have to consider towing because a Mini has up to 3mm of towing at the rear. And so if you take an average of that across the hub face of being 1.5mm, we also need to allow for that so that when we position the hub face, it's in by that much more. These dimensions so far discussed allow us to position the rear subframe and the front subframe laterally. But the next decision then is to work out the wheelbase so that we can position them longitudinally along the chassis jig as well. So the standard Mini wheelbase is 2 meters and 40. So again, 20% reduction gives us 1632, and that's a reduction of 408mm. Now the overall reduction we're going for is something like 610. So we need to find another 200mm from outside of the wheelbase, i.e. where the rear and front overhangs are of the wheel arches. Now we think we can achieve half of that from a change in tyre size wheel combination, but can we get the other half from what's left? That remains to be seen. Last thing to consider is the wheel and tyre combination. If you do the maths on a 12-inch setup versus a 10-inch setup, you find that the overall diameter of 12-inch is around about 503mm, whereas a 10-inch is about 485. And that's only a reduction of 18mm, about 4%, and we're after 20%. So that wouldn't work for us. So the next thing we did was look at 8-inch. We found a 8-inch combination wheel and tyre from a trailer setup, which is 381mm in diameter. So that's just over 20%, which is what we need. And the bonus part was that they fit on the standard hub with no clearance issues. So that's what we've gone with. So all of those dimensions allow us to position the subframes in 3D space, both laterally and longitudinally and in relation to each other. So we've got a chance of being able to position everything on the jig and it working. And from these dimensions we know how much we need to take out of the middle of the subframe, so we were able to start cutting them up and position them on the subframe, on the chassis jig. And here's a picture of the first one done. And next time we shall go into how we fabricated the mounts and got it all laid out on the chassis jig. Give us a like, keep watching, keep subscribing, and we'll see you then.